All right, so let's dive into this whole Python thing. I know for a lot of people, learning a new programming language can feel kind of daunting, like where do you even begin? But what if I told you there's a way to like skip all those endless tutorials and actually build cool stuff like right from the start?
That'd be pretty awesome.
Yeah, right? So that's where this thing called the Preto technique comes in. Basically, it's all about ditching that whole learn by rote method and like getting your hands dirty with real coding from day one.
Yeah, it's a really refreshing approach.
Yeah.
Instead of getting all bogged down in theory, you're like immediately applying what you learn.
I like that. So it's more like hands-on from the get-go.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like imagine learning to cook by actually, making dishes instead of just reading recipes.
That's a perfect analogy, and I bet that really resonates with you guys, our listeners. You're not here to just like passively absorb information. You want to do something with it, right? You want to see results. And that's what makes this technique so exciting.
For sure.
So we're going to be diving deep into this article called How to Learn Python Using the Preto Technique, which really breaks it all down.
Yeah, and it's really well written.
Awesome. So before we get too far, I think it's important to clarify that even though we're like jumping right into coding this Preto technique, it's not about skipping the fundamentals, right?
Definitely not. It's not about just randomly typing things and hoping for the best.
Right. So we still need like a solid foundation.
Absolutely. You
Yeah.
still need to grasp those core concepts, like variables, data types, control structures, functions. Those are the building blocks of any Python program.
Okay, so it's more like we're learning the fundamentals, but by actually using them.
Exactly.
Right.
And the article actually gives this great example of a simple program that checks if a number is even or odd. It's like a small exercise, but it gets you writing code right away and seeing how those concepts work.
So we're not just talking about it, we're actually doing it.
Yep.
I'm already starting to feel more confident. So once we have that foundation, what's next? Do we start building like a house or something?
Great. Kinda. You got it. The Preto technique is all about problem solving. So the next step is to put those foundational skills to the test. That's where coding challenge platforms like LeetCode HackerRank and Code Wars come in.
Okay, I'll be honest, those names sound a little intimidating.
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah.
But trust me, they're not as scary as they sound.
Okay, good. So are we talking like hardcore coding challenges? The kind that would make even experienced programmers sweat?
Not necessarily. These platforms offer challenges at all different levels. So you can start with like beginner-friendly problems and gradually work your way up.
Oh, okay. So it's more like a video game. You start at level 1, and then as you get better, you can move up to the harder level.
Exactly. And the best part is you're not just passively learning, you're actively solving problems, which is a much more effective way to like really understand it.
I like that. So it's like about like feeling overwhelmed and more about like gradually leveling up our skills.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And it's actually kind of fun.
And speaking of fun, the article mentions this mini project idea that sounds pretty cool, building a number guessing game.
Oh yeah, that's a classic project for beginners. And it's a great way to see how the Preto technique works in practice.
So how would that work? Like, what would we be doing?
Well, you'd use variables to store the random number, and the player's guesses then loops to keep the game going until the player guesses correctly, and conditional statements to check if the guess is right.
Wow, so it's like all those basic Python concepts we talked about, but like coming together to create something real.
Exactly. And something fun, too.
That's so cool. I can already picture our listeners getting excited about building their own games.
Yeah.
But the article doesn't stop there, does it? It goes beyond those initial coding challenges and into like building more serious projects.
You're right. The Preto technique emphasizes that even with just a basic understanding of Python, you're ready to tackle bigger things. In fact, the article suggests starting with projects like building a to-do list app or even a weather app.
Whoa, hold on, a weather app. Are we saying that someone with just basic Python knowledge could build something like that?
It might sound daunting at first, but that's the beauty of the Preto technique. It breaks these complex projects down into smaller steps.
So you're not expected to just like magically know everything?
No. You'd use existing libraries and APIs to handle those really complex tasks like fetching the weather data from the internet.
So it's more about learning how to use the tools that are already out there.
Right. And throughout the process, you'll be applying and strengthening your understanding of those core Python concepts we talked about.
Gotcha. So it's not about being a coding wizard overnight. It's more about using those building blocks and learning how to assemble them into something impressive.
Precisely. It's like learning to build with Legos. You start with those simple bricks and gradually learn to create more elaborate structures.
I like that analogy.
Yeah.
And with Python, it sounds like the possibilities are endless.
They really are. You can build anything from simple scripts to automate tasks to complex web applications and data analysis tools.
So this is where it gets really interesting. The article talks about this whole world of Python libraries and frameworks. Can you tell us a bit more about those? Why are they so important?
Well, think of libraries and frameworks as like specialized tool sets. They extend what you can do with Python. You've got libraries like Pandas and NumPy for working with Data Flask and Django for building websites, and even tools like Beautiful Soup and Selenium for web scraping.
So it's like having a whole arsenal of power tools.
Exactly. Each one designed for a specific task.
Wow, that's a lot to take in. It sounds like these libraries and frameworks can really open up a whole new world of possibilities. But I imagine it can be overwhelming for beginners to even know where to start. Any advice for our listeners on how to navigate this vast ecosystem?
The key is to start with the libraries and frameworks that align with your interests and the type of projects you want to build. For instance, if you're fascinated by data analysis, diving into Pandas and NumPy would be a great starting point. Don't be afraid to experiment. The beauty of Python is that you can easily try out different libraries and see what clicks for you.
So it's about finding the tools that spark your curiosity and then just diving in and playing around with them.
Exactly. The Preto technique encourages you to embrace experimentation and learn through trial and error. In fact, making mistakes is a crucial part of the process. It's how you learn what works, what doesn't, and why.
That's a great point. Sometimes I think we get too caught up in trying to do everything perfectly, especially when we're learning something new. But it sounds like the Preto technique encourages us to embrace those mistakes as learning opportunities.
Absolutely. And remember, you don't have to figure everything out on your own. The Python community is incredibly supportive, and there are tons of resources available to help you along the way.
You know, that brings up something I've been wondering about. We've talked about the importance of collaboration in the Preto technique. Can you explain how that works in practice, especially for someone who might be learning Python on their own?
Collaboration is a key element of the Preto technique, and it doesn't have to be limited to working with people in person. Online communities, forums, and open source projects offer fantastic opportunities to connect with other Python enthusiasts, share your code, get feedback, and even contribute to real-world projects.
So even if you're learning solo, you can still tap into this vast network of support and knowledge sharing.
Precisely. Platforms like GitHub, Stack Overflow, and even social media groups dedicated to Python are buzzing with activity. You can find answers to your questions, get insights from experienced developers, and even collaborate on projects with people from all over the world.
That's incredible. It's like having a global team of mentors and collaborators at your fingertips. And I bet that sense of community can be really motivating, especially when you're facing challenges or feeling stuck.
You're right. Having a supportive community can make a huge difference in your learning journey. It's inspiring to see what others are building and to get encouragement from people who understand what you're going through.
Speaking of challenges, I think it's important to acknowledge that learning to code, even with a method like the Preto technique, isn't always easy. There will be times when you hit roadblocks, get frustrated, or maybe even question if you're cut out for this whole programming thing. How does the Preto technique address those moments of doubt and help learners stay motivated?
It's true. Those moments are going to happen, but they don't mean you failed.
Right. So it's not like game over.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
Actually, it's often like in those moments where the real learning takes place.
Interesting. So like we learn the most from our mistakes.
Exactly. And the Preto technique, it encourages you to view those challenges as opportunities to grow, not as setbacks.
So instead of throwing our laptops out the window when we get an error, we should see it as like a puzzle to solve.
Exactly. Think of it like detective work. You've got clues, the error messages, and your job is to use your knowledge and your problem-solving skills to figure out what went wrong.
I like that. We're like coding detectives. But how do we actually go about solving those coding mysteries? Any practical tips?
One of the best things you can do is break the problem down into smaller chunks. Don't try to fix everything at once.
Right. Focus on one thing at a time.
Exactly. Isolate that specific part of your code that's causing the issue.
So it's kind of like the scientific method. Like you form a hypothesis about where the error is tested out and then refine your approach based on the results.
Precisely. And don't be afraid to use all the tools that are available to you. Python has some really great built-in debugging tools.
Oh, cool. Like what?
Well, you can step through your code line by line and see exactly what's happening.
Whoa, so it's like having X-ray vision into our code.
Exactly. You can see what's going on behind the scenes. And another thing to remember is that you're not alone in this.
Right, the community.
The Python community is super helpful. There are tons of resources, online forums, websites. You name it.
So if you're struggling with a specific error, someone else has probably already dealt with it.
Most likely.
Yeah.
And they've probably posted a solution somewhere online.
That's so reassuring. It's like having a global network of coding buddies who are always there to help.
Exactly. You can always find someone who's been there before.
And speaking of buddies, we've talked a lot about collaboration in the Preto technique, but how do we actually find those coding comrades? Especially if we're like learning Python on our own.
Finding like-minded Python folks is easier than you think.
Yeah.
Honestly, online communities are a great place to start.
Like where?
Reddit, Discord, Slack, there are tons of them.
Yeah.
Many of these communities even have channels specifically for beginners, so you can ask questions, share your progress, get support from people who are on the same journey as you.
So it's like finding our tribe of fellow Python adventurers.
Exactly. And don't forget about local meetups and workshops too.
Oh yeah, in-person events?
Yeah, a lot of cities have Python user groups that meet regularly. It's a fantastic way to connect with people face-to-face, build relationships, and learn from more experienced programmers.
I love that. It's like taking our online coding community into the real world.
Exactly. And those in-person connections can be really motivating and inspiring.
For sure. Especially when you're starting to feel a little lost or discouraged, having that support system can make all the difference.
Absolutely. It's a reminder that you're not alone in this and that there are people who genuinely want to see you succeed.
Well said. So we've talked a lot about the Preto technique, the challenges of learning to code, the importance of community, but let's bring it back to our listeners and their own Python journey.
Yeah, let's do that.
So what's one small step you can take today to embrace the Preto technique and start building those Python skills? Maybe tackle a coding challenge experiment with a new library or connect with another Python learner online.
It doesn't have to be anything huge, just a small step in the right direction.
The important thing is to just start.
Exactly. And remember, every step you take, no matter how small, it gets you closer to your goal.
And as you embark on this exciting adventure, we're here cheering you on every step of the way.
Absolutely. We're in this together.
Happy coding, everyone.
Yeah, it's true. Learning to code, it can be like a roller coaster ride.
Yeah. Totally. 1 minute, you're like, yeah, I got this. I'm a coding rock star. And then the next, you're staring at some error message that makes absolutely no sense.
Oh, yeah, I've been there.
So how do we deal with those moments of frustration, when it feels like we're hitting a wall? How can the Preto technique help us get through that?
Well, those moments, they're going to happen. It's totally normal, but it doesn't mean you're not cut out for coding.
Okay, good.
It's actually often in those moments when you learn the most,
So it's like those struggles, they actually make us better coders.
Exactly. The Preto technique, it's all about seeing those challenges as like opportunities for growth, not as like failures.
So instead of getting all discouraged when we hit a snag, we should see it as a chance to learn something new.
Right. Think of it like a puzzle you got to solve.
I like that. So we're like coding detectives.
Exactly. You got your clues, those are the error messages, and your job is to use your knowledge and your problem-solving skills to crack the case.
That's a fun way to think about it. But how do we actually go about solving those coding mysteries? Any practical tips?
One of the best things you could do is to break the problem down into smaller pieces. Don't try to fix everything at once.
Right. Focus on one thing at a time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Isolate the specific part of your code that's causing the issue.
Okay. So it's like that classic advice of how do you eat an elephant?
One bite at a time.
Exactly.
Right.
So we break down this big, scary coding problem into smaller, bite-sized pieces.
And don't be afraid to use the tools that are available to you. Python has some awesome built-in debugging tools that can really help you out.
Like what kind of tools?
Well, for example, you can step through your code line by line and see exactly what's happening at each step.
Whoa, that's cool. It's like having X-ray vision into our code.
Exactly. You can see what's going on behind the scenes.
I like it. And another thing to remember is that we're not alone in this, right?
Never. The Python community is amazing. There are so many resources available, online forums, websites, you name it.
So if I'm struggling with a problem, chances are someone else has already been there and figured it out.
Most likely. And they've probably shared their solution online somewhere.
Okay, that's super reassuring. It's like having a global network of coding buddies who are always there to help.
Exactly. You can always find someone who's been through the same thing and can offer advice.
I love that. And speaking of buddies, we've talked a lot about collaboration in the Preto technique, but how do we actually find those coding comrades, especially if we're learning Python on our own?
Finding like-minded Python people is easier than you might think. Honestly, online communities are a great place to start.
Like where?
There's Reddit, Discord, Slack, all sorts of platforms. And a lot of these communities have channels specifically for beginners.
Well, that's cool. So you can connect with people who are just starting out like you.
Exactly. You can
Yeah.
ask questions, share your progress, and get support from people who are on that same learning journey.
So it's like finding your tribe, your people,
Exactly. And don't forget about local meetups and workshops, too.
right? In-person events?
Yeah, a lot of cities have Python user groups that meet regularly. It's a
Uh,
great way to meet people face to face, you know?
Yeah, for sure. It's like taking that online community and bringing it into the real world.
Exactly. And those in-person connections, they can be really motivating and inspiring.
Totally. And I think that's a great note to end on. We've talked a lot about the Preto technique, the challenges of learning to code, the importance of community and collaboration, and ultimately it's all about taking action and starting that Python journey.
Absolutely. The Preto technique, it's not just about reading about coding. It's about actually doing it. Getting your hands dirty, making mistakes, and learning from them.
Exactly. And remember, you don't have to do it alone. There's a whole community of Pythonistas out there who are ready to support you.
So go out there, find your tribe, write some code, and most importantly, have fun.
Happy coding, everyone!